Barack Obama's vision of transformation was not just a campaign slogan or a political catchphrase. It was the cornerstone of his presidency. From the beginning, he expressed a deep desire to reshape the United States fundamentally, not merely to improve existing systems, but to redefine what America stands for. His call for hope and change resonated with millions who were tired of political stagnation, economic inequality, and social divisions. Yet, beneath this inspirational message lay a broader ideological goal: to alter the balance between individual liberty and collective responsibility. According to PragerU's perspective, Obama sought to move the nation away from its traditional foundation of limited government and free enterprise toward a model that emphasized equality of outcome, social justice, and state-managed solutions to societal problems. This approach represented a significant philosophical shift. The Founding Fathers envisioned a country where freedom meant the right to pursue one's destiny without undue interference. Obama, however, viewed freedom as incomplete if large groups of people lacked access to health care, education, or economic opportunity. In his eyes, government was not the enemy of liberty but its guardian, ensuring that all citizens had the means to live with dignity. This interpretation of freedom required expanding government power, redistributing wealth, and increasing federal oversight, all in the name of fairness. Critics argued that such measures undermined the entrepreneurial spirit and personal responsibility that had driven American success for generations. Supporters believed Obama's transformation was necessary to correct systemic injustices and modernize the nation's social fabric. His presidency thus became a battle between two visions of America, one rooted in self-reliance and individual achievement, and the other in collective progress and shared obligation. The tension between these ideals defined much of the national discourse during his years in office. To many conservatives, Obama's transformation seemed less about hope and more about control, a move toward a society dependent on government assistance rather than individual effort. To his admirers, it was a bold reimagining of the American dream, one that acknowledged structural inequalities and sought to bridge them. In essence, Obama's transformative vision challenged America to reconsider what freedom, equality, and opportunity truly mean, leaving behind a legacy that continues to spark passionate debate about the nation's identity and purpose. Barack Obama's redefinition of freedom and responsibility marked one of the most significant philosophical shifts in modern American politics. Traditionally, freedom in the American context meant the ability to live one's life with minimal government interference, to make personal choices, and to bear the consequences of those choices, good or bad. It was a vision rooted in self-reliance, individual initiative, and accountability. Obama, however, approached freedom from a different perspective. He believed that true freedom could not exist when people were constrained by poverty, lack of education, or absence of access to health care. To him, freedom was not simply the absence of government control, but the presence of government support that allowed people to live meaningful lives. This belief led him to argue that the government had a moral responsibility to ensure that every citizen had basic needs met, something he saw as a prerequisite for genuine liberty. In this vision, government programs were not a form of dependency, but a tool for empowerment. Yet critics, including PragerU, saw this shift as a dangerous redefinition that undermined personal responsibility and independence. They argued that when government guarantees too many rights, beyond those enshrined in the Constitution, it risks creating a culture of entitlement rather than initiative. The idea that health care, housing, or education are rights to be provided by the state changes the nature of citizenship itself, from a relationship based on freedom to one based on dependence. According to this critique, Obama's interpretation encouraged people to look to the government for solutions to personal problems eroding the incentive to work hard and make independent choices. Instead of promoting self-sufficiency, it nurtured reliance on political promises. Obama, on the other hand, defended his position as one rooted in compassion and fairness, arguing that a wealthy society has a moral obligation to care for its most vulnerable. He saw the expansion of social programs not as charity but as justice, a way to level the playing field and give everyone a fair chance to succeed. The clash between these two ideas, freedom as self-reliance versus freedom as government, supported opportunity, defined much of the political polarization during his presidency. It revealed the deep philosophical divide between those who value limited government and those who believe government must actively ensure social and economic equality. Barack Obama's presidency marked one of the largest expansions of federal government power in modern U.S. history, and this expansion was central to his vision of national transformation. Through landmark legislation, new regulatory frameworks, and increased federal oversight, Obama sought to reshape how the government interacted with both individuals and the private sector. The Affordable Care Act, often referred to as Obamacare, became the signature example of this philosophy. It aimed to provide affordable health care for all Americans, reduce the number of uninsured citizens, and hold insurance companies accountable. To Obama, it was an act of fairness and compassion, a way to ensure that health care, a basic human need, was accessible regardless of income or employment status. However, to critics like those represented in PragerU's analysis, the law symbolized the overreach of government into private life. They argued that by mandating individuals to purchase insurance and by setting extensive federal regulations on healthcare providers, Obama had shifted power away from personal choice and market freedom toward bureaucratic control. Beyond healthcare, Obama's administration implemented numerous new regulations on industries such as energy, banking, and education. The Dodd-Frank Act increased federal oversight of financial institutions to prevent another economic collapse, while environmental policies expanded the government's role in managing resources and controlling emissions. To supporters, these actions were responsible and necessary responses to corporate abuse and environmental neglect. To opponents, however, they reflected a growing distrust of private enterprise and an effort to centralize authority in Washington. The increase in government spending, public debt, and taxation during this period reinforced the belief among conservatives that Obama was steering the country toward dependency rather than prosperity. PragerU's perspective suggests that this shift undermined the principle of limited government that had long defined American exceptionalism. The Founding Fathers envisioned a government that existed to protect rights, not to manage daily life. Obama's reforms, though motivated by moral intentions, blurred that line. The federal government began to dictate outcomes rather than safeguard opportunities. While many Americans benefited from expanded access to services, others felt constrained by the growing reach of regulation and bureaucracy. This expansion of government power was not simply a policy change. It was a philosophical statement that the state could and should play a central role in achieving social justice. Whether seen as progress or overreach, Obama's legacy redefined how Americans perceived the balance between liberty, fairness, and authority. Barack Obama's transformation of America extended far beyond laws and economic policies. It also sought to reshape the nation's cultural identity and moral self-understanding. Throughout his presidency, Obama often spoke about America's history with honesty and humility, acknowledging its achievements but also confronting its failures. He emphasized issues of race, inequality, and social justice in a way that encouraged national reflection and dialogue. To many Americans, this was refreshing, a leader willing to face uncomfortable truths and challenge citizens to live up to the ideals of equality and unity. However, from PragerU's viewpoint, this approach represented a deliberate shift away from the traditional narrative of American exceptionalism. Instead of celebrating the country as a beacon of freedom and opportunity, Obama's rhetoric often focused on its flaws: slavery, discrimination, economic disparity, and international mistakes. Critics argued that this narrative fostered guilt rather than pride and divided Americans along lines of race, class, and ideology. Obama's presidency also coincided with the rise of identity politics, where people increasingly defined themselves by race, gender, or social group rather than shared national values. While Obama intended to highlight diversity and inclusion, critics believed his policies and language unintentionally deepened divisions. For example, his responses to police violence and racial tensions were seen by some as encouraging victimhood rather than unity. His promotion of social movements centered on identity and equality shifted public discourse toward viewing society through the lens of oppression and privilege. This cultural reorientation, PragerU argues, weakened the sense of common American identity and replaced it with competing group loyalties. On the global stage, Obama's redefinition of America's moral identity was equally transformative. He adopted a more humble and conciliatory tone toward other nations, arguing that the United States should lead by example rather than dominance. To his critics, this appeared as a retreat from confidence and strength, an admission that America was just another country rather than the exceptional force for good it had once been. His message, though rooted in diplomacy and cooperation, suggested that America needed to atone for past wrongs rather than assert its leadership proudly. The result was a transformation not only of policy but of perception. Obama encouraged Americans to view their nation not as perfect but as perpetually striving toward justice. For admirers, this was moral progress. For detractors, it was cultural self-doubt that eroded patriotism and unity. The lasting legacy of Barack Obama's transformation, as described in PragerU's perspective, is one marked by both progress and polarization, a nation changed in spirit, policy, and identity. While his presidency inspired millions and symbolized hope for a more inclusive society, it also deepened divisions that continue to shape American politics today. Obama's efforts to expand government programs, redefine equality, and confront social injustices created lasting changes in how Americans view their relationship with the state and with one another. Supporters saw him as a visionary leader who brought empathy and moral purpose to government, striving to ensure fairness and dignity for all. But critics argued that his policies fostered dependency, undermined personal initiative, and divided citizens through the promotion of identity-based politics. This tension became one of the defining features of his legacy. The social safety nets expanded under Obama provided immediate relief to millions, but they also increased the number of people reliant on federal assistance. His push for redistribution of wealth and regulation of markets, while intended to close inequality gaps, was viewed by conservatives as weakening economic freedom and discouraging self-reliance. Instead of uniting Americans around shared goals, political discourse became more confrontational. Debates over health care, taxation, race relations, and immigration turned into ideological battles that reflected two fundamentally different visions of the country's future. Obama's charisma and eloquence, which once symbolized unity, became associated in some circles with elitism and moral superiority, further widening the cultural gap between rural and urban America, conservatives and liberals, traditionalists and progressives. Culturally, Obama's presidency changed how many Americans discussed patriotism and identity. His critique of systemic inequality and historical injustice encouraged introspection, but also sparked resentment among those who felt accused or marginalized by his message. The growing prominence of social movements centered on race, gender, and justice, many of which gained traction during or after his presidency, illustrated both the empowerment and the fragmentation of American civic life. PragerU's argument concludes that Obama's transformation succeeded in changing how Americans think about their nation, but not always in ways that fostered cohesion or pride. Instead of a unified sense of purpose, his era left behind a divided political climate where trust in institutions eroded, and citizens became more dependent on government for solutions. The transformation he promised indeed occurred, but it left America questioning not only what it had become, but what it should strive to be.